Am I wrong for refusing to share my grandfather's house with my cousins? I never thought a house could tear a family apart. But here I am, sitting in the quiet living room of the very place I grew up, feeling the weight of betrayal, entitlement, and the fractured bonds of blood. My grandfather's house had always been my sanctuary. It wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was the smell of his old leather armchair, the echo of laughter in the hallway, the creak of the staircase that had once been a stage for childhood adventures. After he passed away, I was named the sole inheritor. According to his will, everything, the house, the small inheritance tucked into drawers, even the tiny garden plot where he grew tomatoes, was mine. I respected the decision. My grandfather had always been fair, and I trusted his judgment. But apparently, my cousins did not. Within days of the funeral, texts and calls started pouring in. "You can't just keep it all," one of them said. "Grandpa would have wanted us to share," another added. At first, I tried to be reasonable. I invited them over, offered a tour of the property, and even suggested we could spend time together in the house for family gatherings. But nothing I did seemed to satisfy them. Each visit turned into a debate over ownership, entitlement, and what they perceived as my selfishness. I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. One afternoon, my cousin Jessica showed up unannounced. She had her 2 kids in tow, a backpack full of snacks, and a look of smug confidence that made my blood boil. She waltzed in as if she owned the place, ignoring my polite greeting. "So when are you going to let us use the house?" she asked casually, leaning against the doorway. I felt my fists clench. "Jessica, this is my grandfather's house. He left it to me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You can visit, of course, but living here or claiming ownership isn't happening." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "It's not fair. You always get everything, and now you're taking even this. Grandpa would have wanted us all to enjoy it." Her words cut deeper than I expected. It wasn't just about fairness. It was about assumptions, about entitlement, about the belief that blood alone justified taking what wasn't yours. I realized in that moment that the battle for the house would not be a gentle one. Over the next few weeks, the pressure intensified. My cousins began showing up uninvited, leaving their kids to play in the yard, raiding the kitchen, and expecting me to host dinners, as if the house was some sort of public inheritance. My patience wore thin. I tried everything. Polite requests, explanations, even offering alternative spaces for them to gather. But nothing worked. It seemed that to them, inheritance was less about honoring my grandfather's wishes, and more about their perceived right to everything he had touched. The tension escalated further when they started speaking to other relatives behind my back, framing me as selfish and uncaring. I heard from aunts and uncles that they had painted me as greedy, a villain hoarding the house for personal enjoyment. The frustration, anger, and sadness built up inside me until one night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my grandfather's old armchair, staring at the photographs lining the walls, trying to reconcile my grief with this sudden hostility. I remembered the stories he had told me about family unity, about generosity, and about making tough choices with integrity. And I realized that the house, the inheritance, and even their resentment were tests, not of ownership but of character. A week later, the situation reached a breaking point. My cousin Mark arrived at my door early on a Saturday morning, 2 friends in tow, insisting they needed to discuss arrangements for using the house. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm, and said firmly, "Mark, I've explained this. The house is mine as per Grandpa's will. No one else has legal claim to live here or make decisions about it." His face turned red with anger. "You can't do this. You're supposed to share. Grandpa wouldn't want you to be like this." I felt my own voice rise, fueled by years of frustration I hadn't allowed myself to express. "I'm honoring Grandpa's wishes. That's what he wanted, and that's what I'm doing. You cannot force me to give up my inheritance." For a moment, we just stared at each other, the tension thick enough to choke on. I saw disbelief, hurt, and anger reflected in his eyes. The same eyes I had grown up with, but now unrecognizable in their entitlement. Mark stormed off, but the battle was far from over. Rumors spread through the family like wildfire. Invitations to gatherings dwindled. My relatives seemed torn between loyalty to me and appeasing my cousins. I felt increasingly isolated, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was my grandfather's house, his legacy, and I had the right to protect it. The legal documents in my drawer were clear, but I realized that family disputes are rarely settled by papers alone. Emotions, pride, and memories weigh heavier than ink on a page. I decided to take control of the narrative. I drafted a heartfelt letter addressed to my cousins and other family members. I wrote about my grandfather's wishes, the memories that made the house special, and my desire to honor him by living in the space he cherished. I tried to convey empathy without giving in, explaining that I valued their presence and love, but could not compromise the house itself. The response was mixed. Some relatives reached out with understanding and support, recognizing the difficulty of the situation. Others continued to criticize, claiming I was cold and selfish, ignoring the clear instructions of the will. A few even suggested mediation or legal intervention. I considered it, but deep down, I knew the house was my grandfather's. And defending it was not just about money. It was about preserving a sanctuary, honoring memories, and asserting the respect due to his final wishes. Over time, small compromises emerged. I invited my cousins for occasional visits, supervised family gatherings, and even agreed to host certain holidays in a structured manner. But I never relinquished my rights, never allowed the house to feel like a public space, and never compromised the principle that this was my inheritance, granted for a reason. Living in the house became a balancing act, managing relationships, respecting memories, and protecting boundaries. Some days were peaceful, filled with nostalgia and quiet reflection. Other days were charged with tension, accusations, and lingering resentment. I learned to navigate these moments with patience, empathy, and firmness, realizing that family loyalty does not always equate to agreement, and that boundaries are sometimes the truest form of love. Looking back now, I understand that the struggle over the house was never just about property. It was about identity, respect, and the courage to uphold one's convictions even in the face of criticism. I learned that standing firm, while painful, can preserve both dignity and memory. And while my relationships with certain family members may never return to the carefree bonds of childhood, I take solace in knowing that I acted with integrity, honoring both my grandfather's wishes and my own sense of self. Am I wrong for refusing to share my grandfather's house with my cousins? No, I am not wrong. I am honoring a legacy, preserving memories, and protecting a home that represents love, history, and the lessons passed down from a man who shaped my values. And in the quiet moments, as I sit in his old armchair, I feel his presence, his approval, and the undeniable truth that standing up for what is right sometimes requires holding firm, even when it is the hardest thing to do. Things escalated faster than I could have imagined. What started as polite requests from my cousins turned into a full-blown campaign to pressure me into sharing the house. I began receiving daily texts, emails, and calls, not from friends or distant relatives, but from my own blood, people who had shared birthday cakes, holidays, and childhood secrets with me. The messages ranged from guilt trips, "Grandpa would never forgive you for being selfish," to thinly veiled threats, like "you'll regret keeping it all for yourself." One morning, I woke to find a group of my cousins sitting on the front porch, unannounced, as if I had invited them. The youngest, barely a teenager, waved at me cheerfully, while the oldest leaned back on the railing with a smug grin. I felt my chest tighten, a mixture of anger, disbelief, and hurt. I thought I could come by and discuss how we can all enjoy the house together, my cousin Mark said casually, ignoring the tension radiating off me. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of patience I had left. "Mark, I've explained this multiple times. This is my grandfather's house. It was left to me. I can't, and won't, share ownership." The words came out firmer than I expected, fueled by months of frustration that had been building like a storm cloud overhead. Mark's grin faltered, replaced by a scowl. "You don't get it," he snapped. "We're family. We're supposed to have a say. Grandpa would never have wanted you to hoard everything." I felt the sting of betrayal, the words cutting deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just about the house. It was about my cousins assuming entitlement over something that was never theirs, about their belief that family means taking, not respecting boundaries. "I am honoring Grandpa's wishes," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "He left the house to me and I will respect his intentions." You are welcome to visit, but this is my home." The confrontation ended with slammed doors and glares that burned long after they left. But the emotional fallout lingered. Rumors spread through the family like wildfire. Relatives I once considered neutral suddenly called me, asking if I was really being selfish or mean. Invitations I had once received disappeared, and whispered conversations seemed to follow me everywhere. I began to feel isolated, questioning whether I had overreacted, whether I had somehow failed in my duty as a family member. One afternoon, as I sat in the kitchen staring at the untouched paperwork for a home renovation, my phone buzzed with another message from Jessica. She had drawn up a so-called proposal for how we could all use the house, complete with schedules, shared expenses, and arbitrary rules that essentially handed control over the property to her. I felt a wave of frustration and despair. I realized then that no matter how much I tried to reason, compromise, or be patient, my cousins were determined to claim something that was never theirs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered through the empty hallways of the house, tracing my fingers along the banister my grandfather had polished by hand, running my hand over the grooves in the wooden floors where my father had once played as a boy. Memories flooded in. The Christmas mornings, the summers spent gardening, the quiet evenings reading by the fireplace. I realized that the house represented more than inheritance. It was a repository of love, memory, and history, and I wasn't willing to let anyone compromise that. The next day, I took a decisive step. I contacted a lawyer to confirm my rights and explore options for protecting the house against unwanted claims or intrusions. The lawyer's response was clear and affirming. The will was legally sound, my ownership undisputed, and I had the right to enforce boundaries, including preventing my cousins from living in or taking control of the property. Armed with legal backing, I drafted a letter to my cousins and other family members, laying out the facts with firmness and clarity. I explained Grandpa's wishes, my rights as the inheritor, and my willingness to host family gatherings while maintaining my boundaries. I hoped that a written, professional approach would make them understand that this was not about selfishness, but about honoring a loved one's intentions. The reactions were mixed. Some relatives expressed support, offering reassurance and admiration for my steadfastness. Others, predictably, continued to criticize and guilt me, painting me as greedy and cold-hearted. My cousins, in particular, responded with a mix of anger and indignation, refusing to acknowledge the legality of my claim. The tension reached its peak one weekend when Jessica and her kids arrived unannounced, insisting on staying for an entire week. I was at my wit's end. I had tried patience, negotiation, and empathy, but this was crossing the line. I told them firmly, "You cannot stay here. This is my grandfather's house, and my legal right as the owner allows me to deny occupancy." Jessica's face twisted with disbelief and outrage. "You're making this about money and control. Grandpa loved all of us equally." I clenched my fists, my voice steady but charged. "No. This is about respect for his wishes and protecting the memories he entrusted to me. I am not denying love or family. I am asserting boundaries." The confrontation ended with them leaving in a huff, but the damage to relationships lingered. Over the following weeks, I noticed the psychological toll this ongoing conflict had on me. I was constantly alert, anticipating uninvited visits or confrontations. Simple joys, like reading in the garden or cooking in the kitchen, were overshadowed by the anxiety of potential disputes. Sleep became fitful, and even casual interactions with supportive family members were tinged with caution. But amidst this stress, a quiet realization emerged. Defending the house was not merely about legal ownership. It was about preserving my grandfather's legacy, my own sense of integrity, and the memories embedded in every corner of that home. I began to document everything, the legal documents, communications, and incidents involving my cousins, to ensure that if the conflict escalated further, I could protect myself and the house. This process, while tedious, also gave me a sense of control, a way to transform frustration into proactive defense. One evening, I sat on the porch with my father's old journal in hand. Flipping through the pages, I read entries about his childhood, his values, and his dreams for the family. It was then that I realized something crucial. This house, these memories, and this inheritance were more than material. They were the embodiment of choices, values, and love passed down through generations. Defending them was an act of honor, not selfishness. As months passed, I found ways to coexist with the reality of my cousin's presence, at least temporarily. I hosted family events, limited visits, and established clear rules. I maintained vigilance, but I also allowed moments of connection, understanding that relationships could endure tension if boundaries were respected. In the quiet moments as I walked through the hallways of my grandfather's house, I felt a deep sense of resolve. I understood that family disputes are rarely clean or simple, and that protecting what is rightfully yours can come at emotional cost. Yet, the preservation of integrity, memory, and respect for the past outweighed the discomfort. Am I wrong for refusing to share my grandfather's house with my cousins? I've questioned myself endlessly, wondered if I was being too rigid or too protective. But when I sit alone in the living room, surrounded by photographs, heirlooms, and the echo of laughter past, I know I am honoring a legacy, asserting boundaries, and preserving a home that is a repository of love, history, and principle. I am not wrong. I am standing firm, navigating betrayal with dignity, and ensuring that what my grandfather entrusted to me remains intact. And though the road is difficult, fraught with tension and criticism, I take solace in knowing that integrity, respect for memory, and the courage to stand up for what is right are worth every struggle endured. The tension in the house reached a boiling point one rainy afternoon. I was working in the study, surrounded by my grandfather's old books and papers, when I heard a car pull up sharply in the driveway. The sound of boots splashing through puddles made my stomach tighten. I knew before opening the door who it was: Mark and Jessica, determined to push their claims further. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They barged into the foyer as if the house belonged to them. "We need to talk. Now," Jessica said, her voice dripping with irritation. I felt every nerve in my body tense, my grandfather's portrait on the wall suddenly seeming to watch over me, urging calm and clarity. I took a deep breath. I've explained this before. There's nothing to talk about in terms of sharing ownership. The house is mine. Mark stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "We're not talking about ownership," he said, his tone almost menacing. "We're talking about family. Grandpa would have wanted us all to have a say. You can't just lock us out." I felt a surge of anger, hot and raw. Family isn't measured by entitlement or pressure. It's measured by respect, and right now you're showing none. I am the inheritor of this house. That is legally and morally binding. I will not negotiate ownership. The room fell silent, except for the drumming of rain against the windows. For a moment, I thought the confrontation might end there, but then Jessica smirked and pulled out a set of papers. My heart sank as I recognized them. They were documents for a lawyer she had apparently consulted, claiming that the will was ambiguous and that all cousins should have joint usage rights. "We're prepared to take this to court if necessary," she said casually, as if threatening legal action was a normal part of family etiquette. I felt the weight of the room, the rain outside, and my grandfather's absent presence pressing down on me. Fear, frustration, and a fierce protective instinct swirled together. I knew what I had to do. If you choose to go down that path, I am ready. But know this: the will is clear, Grandpa's intentions are explicit, and the law is on my side. I am not backing down. Jessica and Mark exchanged a glance, their confidence faltering slightly. "You think you're untouchable," Mark said, his voice low but sharp. "We'll see how long that lasts." They stormed out, leaving the door swinging in the wind, the echoes of their footsteps lingering like a warning. Over the next few weeks, the threat of legal action hung over me like a storm cloud. I contacted my lawyer immediately, reviewing every clause, every signature, and every notation. Everything was airtight, but the stress was real, tangible, gnawing at my sleep and my focus. Friends offered support, but even they admitted that family disputes of this nature are emotionally exhausting. Every time I walked through the halls of the house, I felt both empowered and trapped. The sanctuary of my childhood had become a battleground. One evening, I received a letter in the mail from Jessica's lawyer. The letter was polite, formal, and yet pointed. It questioned the clarity of the will, suggested that my cousins were being unfairly excluded, and implied that mediation could resolve the issue more amicably. I read the words over and over, my fingers gripping the paper until it crumpled slightly. Part of me wanted to crumble with it, to cave to pressure, to avoid confrontation. But as I sat in my grandfather's old armchair, I thought about everything he had taught me. integrity, resilience, and the courage to do what's right even when it's hard. I decided then that I would not let intimidation dictate my actions. I drafted a detailed response through my lawyer, reaffirming the validity of the will, my legal rights, and my commitment to honoring my grandfather's wishes. I also offered structured opportunities for family gatherings, supervised visits, and joint celebrations, but made it clear that no one would gain ownership or unilateral control over the house. Weeks turned into months as the legal and emotional tug-of-war continued. I could feel the strain in every interaction. Emails were tense, phone calls curt, and casual family gatherings were fraught with subtle hostilities. Yet, I also noticed something shifting. My cousin's tactics became more calculated, less impulsive. I realized that my unwavering stance, combined with legal preparedness and clear boundaries, had started to make them reconsider their approach. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon, when I organized a small gathering at the house for other relatives who had been caught in the middle. I wanted to demonstrate that family could coexist peacefully under my stewardship, that the house could still be a place of warmth and connection. My cousins were invited but skeptical. Surprisingly, they accepted, perhaps curious or perhaps trying to assert subtle dominance. Throughout the day, I noticed the change in their demeanor. They were quieter, more reserved, and even hesitant to challenge me. I felt a cautious optimism. Maybe this was the moment where reason and respect could start to outweigh entitlement and confrontation. During the gathering, my uncle pulled me aside. He had watched the whole saga unfold with quiet concern. "You've handled this with more dignity than I ever could have imagined," he said. "It's not easy to stand firm when emotions run this high, but you're doing it the right way." His words struck a chord. They reminded me that my battle wasn't just about property. It was about character, principle, and honoring the past while navigating the present. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in the living room, the rain still tapping softly against the windows. I thought about the journey so far, the arguments, the threats, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt and fear. And I realized that despite everything, I had grown stronger. I had learned to navigate conflict with composure, to protect what was rightfully mine without losing empathy, and to assert boundaries without burning bridges entirely. In the following months, small gestures began to shift the dynamic with my cousins. They started respecting my space, limited their unscheduled visits, and even acknowledged the house as my grandfather's legacy, rather than a playground for entitlement. While the relationship was still tense, there was progress, subtle but undeniable. I also focused on rebuilding my own connection to the house, not just as an inheritance, but as a living tribute to my grandfather. I began cataloging old photographs, organizing mementos, and restoring parts of the garden he had loved. Each act of care reminded me that this house was not just about ownership. It was about memory, legacy, and love. I thought a lot about morality, fairness, and family. Could I have shared more? Been more flexible? Possibly. But the principle of respecting Grandpa's explicit wishes outweighed the discomfort of criticism. I learned that sometimes doing the right thing isn't popular, and that integrity often comes with emotional costs. I realized that the house, in all its beauty and complexity, had become a crucible for testing my courage, patience, and emotional intelligence. And I understood that this struggle, while painful, was shaping me into someone stronger, wiser, and more capable of navigating life's conflicts without losing a sense of self. Am I wrong for refusing to share my grandfather's house with my cousins? I've asked myself that countless times, weighed the opinions of relatives, and battled my own guilt. But in the quiet moments, sitting in the armchair where I once listened to Grandpa's stories, I know the answer. I am not wrong. I am honoring a legacy, asserting boundaries, and protecting memories that belong not just to me, but to the family's history. And while the path is far from easy, I feel a quiet sense of empowerment, knowing that standing firm, acting with integrity, and respecting the past is worth every confrontation, every sleepless night, and every pang of guilt that comes from doing what is right, rather than what is expected. The months turned into a full year since the battle over my grandfather's house had begun, and yet the tension never fully disappeared. I had established boundaries, defended my rights, and endured accusations, whispers, and judgment from relatives. But in that time, I also discovered something essential about myself, about family, and about the meaning of legacy. One afternoon, as I was tending the garden my grandfather loved so much, I noticed a small figure approaching from the driveway. It was my youngest cousin, barely old enough to understand the concept of inheritance, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. She looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "I just wanted to say sorry for all the trouble," she mumbled, holding out the flowers. I felt my heart clench. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of acknowledgement, remorse, and a small bridge toward reconciliation. I knelt to accept the flowers, forcing myself to remain calm, even as a flood of emotion surged through me. "Thank you," I said softly. "I appreciate this." Moments like that reminded me that while the adults in my family could be stubborn, selfish, and demanding, the children still carried innocence, potential, and the capacity to learn from our mistakes. This realization gave me hope. The following weeks were a delicate dance of maintaining firm boundaries while cautiously allowing small steps toward rapprochement. My cousins began requesting visits rather than showing up unannounced. They started acknowledging the house as my grandfather's legacy, rather than a contested prize. While the tension was still present, subtle signs of respect began to emerge. I took this opportunity to create structure around family interactions. I scheduled monthly gatherings, invited extended family for holidays, and hosted occasional events where everyone could enjoy the house without overstepping boundaries. I insisted on rules. No unilateral decisions, no overnight stays without prior consent, and respect for the property and its history. Surprisingly, the structure worked. My cousins began to adjust, learning to navigate a shared space without assuming ownership. While full warmth and ease were still distant, there was progress. One particularly stormy evening, I received a call from my uncle, my father's brother, who had watched the saga unfold with quiet concern. "You've handled this remarkably well," he said. "It could have turned into an all-out war, but you've managed it with dignity and clarity. I think your grandfather would be proud." I felt a wave of relief and affirmation wash over me. All the sleepless nights, the confrontations, and the emotional toll suddenly seemed worth it. I realized that defending what is rightfully yours is never easy, especially when emotions, memories, and expectations are involved. But integrity, patience, and steadfastness often carry rewards beyond legal validation. They preserve honor, memory, and personal peace. Over time, I began documenting not just the conflicts, but the resolutions, the small victories, and the lessons learned. Each journal entry reminded me of the growth I had experienced, the resilience I had cultivated, and the sense of self-respect that had been forged in the fires of familial tension. One afternoon, I hosted a small tea for my cousins and other relatives. We sat in the living room, the rain tapping gently against the windows, the house filled with quiet laughter and tentative conversation. I looked around and realized that while not perfect, the house had become a place of cautious harmony. There was still tension, yes, but also mutual recognition of boundaries and respect for my grandfather's wishes. That night, after everyone had left, I walked through the hallways, running my hands over the polished banister, pausing to look at the photographs lining the walls. I remembered my grandfather's words. "A house is more than walls and floors. It's the memories we carry within it, and the respect we show to those who came before us." I finally understood the full weight of that statement. My battle was never truly about bricks, wood, or money. It was about integrity, memory, and the courage to stand firm when doing the right thing felt difficult and lonely. Reflecting on the journey, I realized that my cousin's actions were driven by a mix of grief, entitlement, and misunderstanding. I could have allowed resentment to consume me, to see them as enemies. Instead, I chose to uphold boundaries with compassion, offering space for reconciliation, while protecting the home that symbolized so much more than inheritance. Am I wrong for refusing to share my grandfather's house with my cousins? I've pondered this endlessly, weighed the opinions of extended family, and faced internal conflict. But now, with the distance of time and the clarity of reflection, I know the answer. I am not wrong. I acted in accordance with Grandpa's wishes, protected the integrity of his legacy, and navigated a complex emotional landscape with patience and courage. And in doing so, I discovered something even more valuable than the house itself: my capacity to act with dignity under pressure, to maintain empathy without compromising principles, and to honor both memory and self-respect. The house remains mine, but it is no longer a fortress of isolation or conflict. It has become a space where memories are preserved, relationships are cautiously mended, and the lessons of the past guide the present. I have learned that standing firm does not mean shutting others out entirely. It means creating a space where respect, clarity, and integrity are the foundation. In quiet moments, I sit in Grandpa's old armchair, gaze out at the garden he tended, and feel his presence in the creak of the floorboards, the scent of polished wood, and the gentle hum of the house settling around me. I know that this space, once a battleground, is now a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of family when boundaries are honored. And as I reflect on everything, the arguments, the accusations, the fear, and the eventual progress, I realize that life rarely offers simple resolutions. What matters is the integrity with which we navigate challenges, the respect we afford memory and legacy, and the courage to stand by what is right, even when it is hard. I am not wrong. I am standing firm, preserving love, honoring history, and protecting a home that holds the essence of everything my grandfather cherished. And while some relationships may never fully heal, the lessons learned, the boundaries set, and the courage exercised will continue to guide me in all aspects of life. In the end, the house is more than property. It is a symbol of resilience, integrity, and the delicate balance between family, memory, and self-respect. And that, I know, is worth every battle fought, every sleepless night endured, and every tear shed along the way.